All right, hello everybody. Welcome to UK CORRAL, the podcast that reviews every single comic ever written by a British writer. I'm your co-host Mike Mignola, and as always, I'm joined by Adamantium.
Uga shaka.
It changes every week, as well as Nice Man.
Yeah, who is not nice.
Well, we still have yet to see you not be nice, but
I said burn Neil Gaiman's comics. What more do you want me to do?
Yeah, but you said it with a polite English accent, so it's fine.
Okay.
But anyway, so we're here to talk about, this is probably the most mainstream comic we've done so far. This is Peter Milligan's first storyline for Batman, which I definitely bought off the stands when it came out. This was the height of Batmania. I'm sure everyone here was reading Batman at the time. Maybe not Adam, because you might have been too young. Adam, were you reading Batman at this time?
No, actually, funny thing, Batman comics really scared me as a child because they were so dark and gritty. Of course, I was the prime age where I was fully entrenched in Batmania. I loved the Burton film, loved all the little comics, toys. The cartoon was just around the horizon. But I don't think it was this comic, but it was another one where I just remember maybe it was Man-Bat or maybe it was Killer Croc or some other sort of bestial character. And I just remember being so scared looking at the comic in the comic shop, I bought something else.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Paul, what about you?
At that time, this is the late 80s, isn't it?
This is mid-90s, 1990.
1990,
Oh, yeah, about the time of the film, after the film and everything.
Right.
I don't remember reading much Batman after the Frank Miller Dark Knight stuff, really.
Interesting.
I don't really know why. I think the one time in recent memory that I read Batman avidly was when Grant Morrison was writing it.
Of course, yeah.
Oh, and also the Jim Lee. Oh, what else was Jim Lee? Jeff
Hush?
Lee, the Hush stuff.
Okay. Jeff Loeb.
Loeb, Lieb.
Yeah.
It begins with L.
Yeah. Okay.
And the other series that I really enjoyed, which just about everybody else hated apparently, was the All-Star Batman, Frank Miller, Jim Lee.
I did not like that. But that's another story.
That is another story. So really around 1990, no, I mean, I probably was looking through this stuff, but not really.
Okay. So for me, I read a couple DCs as a little kid, like 2 Batmans, 2 Supermans. Then I skipped, I don't know how many years, but I picked up a random issue of Batman by Jim Starlin and Jim Aparo, where Nightwing meets Robin. Then I got maybe one more, and then Death in the Family happened, and I bought that, and I loved Death in the Family. That made me love Jim Starlin, and made me love Jim Aparo. And unfortunately, as soon as that storyline was done, Jim Starlin did 1 or 2 more issues, and then he kind of quit, kind of got pushed out. So right away, in the midst of Batmania, Marv Wolfman took over. I didn't really like him on Batman. I didn't really like Alan Grant on Detective. So I was loving Legends of the Dark Knight, but I was not liking Batman and Detective. But then when Peter Milligan came on, I right away noticed that he was a better writer than the other ones. So I ended up following. He also did Detective for about a year. I don't know if you remember that. Well, it's okay because we'll be reviewing all of them. But don't worry about it. But anyway, so this storyline, unfortunately, was not drawn by Jim Aparo. It was done by Keiron Dwyer, who, Paul, have you met him?
No. This isn't because you corrected me when I said Jeff Lee.
Oh,
it's Keiron.
Keiron Dwyer.
And I just remember because you said Untold Legends of the Batman. That was a great series.
Oh, Legends of the Dark Knight.
Oh, sorry, Legend. Yeah, not Untold. That was John Burnley. Legends of the Dark Knight. Yeah, that was a great series.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially the first few years, yeah. But anyway, okay, so let's just jump into this. This is kind of a reimagining of the Riddler's character. It's a way to revamp him without wiping out all this continuity, right? Now, do we want to go through the plot? Do we want to just talk about the whole story? How do we want to do this? We didn't even talk about it before we started recording.
I mean, there should probably be some mention of the plot because it's very clever.
Yeah, okay. So look, I'll quickly summarize the first one. Like not panel by panel, but quickly. We kind of get a what's this called? Like cutting back and forth between a scene that takes place in 1793 of this cult. Okay, and they're performing something called the Ceremony of the Bat, and it's being narrated in this, I believe it's a book. And it's cutting back and forth, and it's explaining how this ritual works and what they have to do, and one of the key parts of the ritual is that they have a, what do they call her? Do they call her a man bat or a bat? What do they call her? Anyway,
she's supposed to be like the man bat.
Right.
But essentially, she's the sacrifice for this.
Right. Exactly. And while that's going on, then they cut to the present, and we're getting this kind of narration of Batman, who's on another case. He gets called into Commissioner Gordon. So far, it seems like a typical Batman story. Commissioner Gordon basically reveals that the Riddler is back because they've got this riddle. And then just as that happens, a woman appears on the ledge, and she's kind of delirious, not really aware of what's going on. She ends up falling off the ledge. Batman tries to rescue her by using his bat rope. She ends up smashing through a building. We cut away to the Riddler, who is acting a lot more bloodthirsty than we're used to the Riddler being around this time. He shoots a cop in the head. Batman is kind of following the case. We're cutting back to the ritual in the past. And we're also getting the point of view of the Riddler and his gang. Batman ends up coming to this library and seeing that Riddler has tied up this security guard in a noose and is threatening to break his neck. Batman ends up saving the security guard, bringing him to the hospital, and then he gets a tape. Oh yes, this is one of the Riddler's clues, but he gets a tape that says the Hanging Man on it. So then Batman, and help me out if I'm missing anything here. Oh, so what they find out is that 4 babies have been kidnapped.
Mm-hmm.
This is the key kind of mystery of why is the Riddler kidnapping these 4 babies. So the final confrontation in this issue is that Batman tracks down the Riddler, and the Riddler actually has a baby with him in this. It's a what is it called?
Oh, it's a blood bank.
A blood bank, right?
Yeah.
So he ends up throwing the baby at Batman. Batman catches the baby, and it's actually not. It's not the real baby. It's a bag full of blood, right? And we don't.
Explosive, actually.
It's what?
It's actually an explosive, so it blows up viscera inside, but it also causes the residual blood bank encasements to shatter, and he is drenched in blood. Right.
And again, we don't know why any of this is happening just yet, but we're going to find out in the next couple chapters. Batman ends up jumping into his Batmobile and chasing after the Riddler. The Riddler has the real baby, which he leaves out on the road. Batman almost runs the baby over, but ends up stopping just in time. And we get a nice little moment here because, again, this is tough guy Batman. This is post Frank Miller Dark Knight Batman. But we see a scene here of Batman smiling with the baby and saying, "It's okay, sweetheart. You're okay now." It's just very unusual for Batman at that time. So I thought it was pretty cool. Then he gets a little a card here with the hangman on it, which ties in with the tape that we saw earlier. He's conversing with Alfred about the case. He gets into his bat suit. Then he makes his way to a cemetery and seemingly ends up being confronted by a zombie. And then that is the cliffhanger of this issue. And we'll talk about this issue before we jump forward. But first, Nice Man, what was your impression of chapter 1 of the story?
Well, my first thought was about the Mike Mignola cover.
You know what? We should talk about that. You're right. Let's talk about that.
Because he has a very distinctive style, which is good. I mean, I think all the artists should have a distinctive style. I just remembered that Jim Shooter hated Mike Mignola's style.
Okay, are you allowed to give us a tidbit of what Jim Shooter did not like about his style?
I don't really know any more than that. It was
Okay.
one of the editors at Marvel was, commenting about how things were with Jim Shooter in the later stages of
Okay.
his time there, and he was just saying that he had some work done by Mike Mignola, and then he found out that Jim Shooter hates Mike Mignola's artwork. But anyway, it was a very distinctive cover. Good. I don't think everything should just be so blandly conventional. So
Okay.
that was good. At first, I wasn't sure from this first issue about whether I would enjoy it or not. Sometimes it's good when you have these kind of parallels to something that happened 200 years before or whatever. Sometimes it can be very contrived and predictable. So I didn't really know what to expect. So I thought, well, I guess I'll see in the ensuing issues whether this is just kind of a conventional parallel time story and how they're linked, and is it contrived, not contrived, and the art also. I thought, do I like it? Do I not like it? I kind of like it. I don't like it. I couldn't really make up my mind. Would it help if there was a particular inker? Why, if I don't like it, why don't I like it? And I was confused by my reactions.
Okay. So you had conflicting reactions.
Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Adamantium?
Let me just say, first off, the biggest thing I took away from this was the art, because across the board, I really was impressed by Dwyer. I really loved the extremity of the reactions on characters' faces. There is something where I think we've had this discussion before. You can attempt to have this simulacrum, this sort of extreme realism in your art, and sometimes it feels flat. It doesn't feel like there's any sort of energy behind it. Here, it's all kinetic. I love how hyper-emphasized the facial expressions are. The amount of detail that goes into things like, even on the opening page, the sort of detailed hinge of the knife, which at the same time is not distracting, which can happen sometimes with extremely detailed art. It sets a certain mood, which I really appreciate. And I am actually quite a fan. I haven't seen Dwyer's work that much, so I am very impressed by this. The fight scenes also are very kinetic. I really like the energy that they have. And that takes me to the plot, which is, I'm going to say, I think this is the one advantage of reading this in a trade or a collection rather than standalone issues. The framing device of having it, that initial opening set in the 18th century, it doesn't really get resolved or alluded to too much more in this. There's one other sequence where we see a little bit further on in the sacrifice scene where there is a giant man-bat shadow looming over the cult. And so that's going to be a prelude for what we'll see later on. But beyond that, it doesn't really wrap up or seem too consistent. It will, I think, as you read the 3 issues back to back to back, which is how I read it. But you are seeing this darker side of the Riddler, which I appreciate. Sometimes I feel there is almost too much of an attempt at shock. I think the fact that the person being lynched is a black officer is a little bit too on the nose. I felt that was just trying to be a bit edgy compared to, some of the more insidious actions of the Riddler in this, such as throwing that dummy baby. That was an explosive device. That was visceral and harsh. Having that baby laid out in front of the Batmobile. This brought me to one other point I want to make, which is I love Batman's characterization in this, because as you said, Mike, this is post Miller. This is the idea that Batman has to be this sole, very brooding figure in the dark, and yet here he has this regret. He's basically praying to himself as he slams on the brakes. Oh my God, did I hit the baby? I hear crying. I could cry now that I'm hearing this baby cry. There's just, or to paraphrase a little bit of what he says,
Sure.
But I really like that aspect of Batman, because he isn't just this solitary, seemingly emotionless sort of mercenary. He's doing this with motivation because he cares. He wants to protect a baby. He wants to protect the innocent. And to me, this is my ideal representation of Batman. Gritty, dark, edgy, yes, but also someone who is a living conscience, someone who goes to protect the innocent and those who cannot protect themselves. This is the Batman I grew up to be a fan of, and it's very refreshing to see this all these years later. As I said, if you got this off the newsstands at the time, I'm not sure, because I wasn't a reader at that point, if it would be satisfying. I think as a trade, it's great. Ending right here, I don't even know about the cliffhanger. I always feel strange about supernatural elements being brought into Batman. Hypocrite, I know he has tons of supernatural villains, of course, but that's where I'm at. But in the end, I was very satisfied with this issue.
First, I'll say I do agree. I don't think Batman really should have supernatural elements in his stories. However, we'll talk more about that as we go. I don't mind tying it into the history of Gotham. I definitely don't mind that, but I don't like the supernatural elements that end up coming out of this. I definitely agree with you there. One thing we'll get to once we get to the end of the story is I think Peter Milligan has a weakness that I noticed early on, and he does it a lot. He'll have this super complicated mystery that there's almost no way to possibly figure out how to solve, and then the villain or whoever will reveal it all in the last issue. And I appreciate that he planned it all out, and it's as complicated as it is, but it's almost a little bit ridiculous and convoluted when we get to it, which we'll talk about in part 3. But I do want to talk about the art because Keiron Dwyer is someone I only really know from Captain America. Did you read his Captain America run with Mark Grunwald? It was around the time that John Walker became Captain America.
Yeah.
Paul, stop. It was so good. It's my favorite Captain America run. Adam, listen, I'm dead serious. Start from Mark Grunwald's first issue and go all the way up until John Walker becomes Captain America. When Steve Rogers comes back, that's kind of the peak around 350. But those first 2 years are great. Or 3 years. Like
you're slowly making Nice Man climb into the grave right now.
Yeah, I think he is. Anyway, Keiron Dwyer's art on those issues was great, and everything you mentioned about the energy. Well, I'm on page, like I'm just looking through here. There's a weird energy. It's almost like the more I look at it, the more I appreciate it. But even when the girl is on the ledge, the way that she falls off, the way that her clothes are blowing up because she's falling and it's windy. It's just there is an energy that a lot of other artists don't have, and even though you might not meditate on every panel at the beauty of each individual panel, there's an overall energy and storytelling that's a classic storytelling. But he does have a real energy. Like when the security guard is tied up in the noose and he falls, the energy of him falling, and then the fact that half of his face is off panel and his tongue is sticking out. That's the kind of thing he did in Captain America all the time, and I think he's great at it. I'm glad you called attention to the art because I actually think it is good. As far as the inks are by Dennis Janke, who did he worked on Superman with I think he worked with Jerry Ordway, and that's what at a superficial glance this looks like Jerry Ordway to me. So yeah, I don't know. I really did like this art. So.
I did.
Yeah, I really did like it. Yeah, I did like it.
And I found that I really liked it one panel, and then not so much the next panel. Right. And I even made a point to myself of looking at 2 side-by-side panels. And then I thought, oh, look, that's really good. That one to the right. Oh, that's just so ordinary. That one to the left. So it kind of confused me. What was that I wanted to? I just.
The history of Gotham.
You said about a weakness.
Oh, sure.
Peter Milligan's, and you also said about the noose, and kind of being so obvious it was a black security guard.
Oh, that was Adam. Yeah.
Oh, Adam said that. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a tendency among the British and Irish writers to go for the sensational, and if they're not careful, it just becomes sensation for its own sake. Mm-hmm. And we know the champion of that is Mark Miller.
Oh yes.
It's not writing, it's just sensation for its own sake. And I think Alan Moore is probably the most restrained, or I could be wrong in saying that. Maybe Grant Morrison as well, but even they, from time to time, can go for the sensational. And I tend to think that British Irish writers, they like to shock, and I think it's a bit of a British Irish culture to want to do that, although that sounds like kind of psychobabble. But I do think that that's something, a bit of a common element among them over the many titles they've written and the many stories they've written. The other thing is, it was funny for me when you were like voicing your disapproval about the Batman supernatural aspects, because a few years in the mid-'80s, when I had fairly regular contact with a particular editor at Marvel, and when I was in New York City briefly, and I was at that editor's office in Marvel Comics, he told me encouraging things about a plot synopsis that I'd written, and I asked him what he thought of it. But it was a Batman plot synopsis, and it had aspects of the supernatural, where, just like Peter Milligan here, Batman ends up on a slab, secured, bound to a slab with some ritualistic thing going on.
Interesting.
Well, just a coincidence. And I remember him saying to me, well, I don't know if DC is interested in, Batman and supernatural stuff, but, you guys got to get it to an editor there and see what they think. But then within a few years, they were doing Batman supernatural stuff. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they've shied away from it really ever since.
I just want to bring up one preference I have, and I think I've mentioned this perhaps ad nauseum on this program, so my apologies. I like when the supernatural element is brought in, just not to a superhero story, but almost any narrative, and there's ambiguity about whether it's actually happening,
right,
or it's some sort of machination of a mind, or perhaps it is an illusion someone is perpetuating. What I really like about certain Batman villains with particular depictions is alluding to the fact that there could be a supernatural element, but then leaving it vague enough to give grounds for reason. So it's like dangling a really interesting thread that keeps you coming back. Perhaps there is something to this, something supernatural, or perhaps it's mundane. I've seen really great stories, for example, with the ventriloquist, and then I've seen god-awful ones. And it really depends upon the writer, of course. But I always really vehemently dislike when they make the ventriloquist character supernatural, that it's a living dummy. I absolutely revile those storylines. I don't know why. Maybe I hate mannequins. Maybe I hate puppets. But I just dislike it. And as we're going to see, I'm not going to spoil what's happening, but we get a definitive answer whether the supernatural is happening or not. And I always like keeping it somewhat vague and subtle as what the answer is. With that said, Mike, I think the panel you're focused upon is a good depiction of the art, because this is what I love seeing. A lot of times, an author would take up some space on a page, showing a sequence where the woman is caught by the batarang and the rope, and then she swings towards the window, and the next panel is her shattering through the glass. Here, there's enough energy and momentum where they didn't need that. There's an economic sense of art here where they didn't have to have that intervening panel. It just shows her crashing through the window, and with that movement and velocity, you know it's happening. You don't need to have that middle pattern to complete the sequential art pattern of this. I think this is really an example of why I do think this art is so strong.
Well, now that you're right, it's like the more I look at it, we see the woman falling towards us, and her body language is perfect. Like we can see that she's falling. We see the Batman in the background. Then we see her the batarang wrapped around her foot. But like, look at the movement here. Like the swooping movement of his cape draws your eye from her right to his body, and his body language is so good. We can feel the weight of her pulling on the bat rope, right? Which leads the bat rope, the line of the bat rope leads directly to the next panel where it's holding her body. Her arms are coming out of the panel, almost off the page. And then, like you said, she smashes through the building. But the thing I didn't even think about is that it's like the panel is the building. So it's like she's smashing through the panel. It's brilliant. It's great.
Yes.
It's very good. It is very good storytelling, and you know, I mean, I think nobody can fault that. Does it tell a good, clear story? Is it intelligently laid out? It is.
Sometimes I never know. I don't know when you're finished your point. So that I feel like you're gonna keep talking, Paul. But okay.
Well,
okay.
It's because, you know, there are so many things that could be said.
Sure.
You know,
okay.
it's very good, clear storytelling. There's no doubt about it. If any of us had written this, and this is the artwork we got back, you know, to add dialogue and other stuff, we would say without a doubt, oh, it's great. It's great. Right. It tells my story. It tells it really well. But we didn't write it. And, you know, we are readers. And I'm so hung up on the Marshall Rogers, Terry Austin Batman from Detective that, you know, I wish I could just consider this in isolation.
Okay.
But I've got this other stuff running through my head.
Gotcha. Okay. So how about this? Why don't we jump to the next chapter, chapter 2? I didn't even get a chance to talk about Mike Mignola's art. I'll say that I've always been a fan, but he's never been my favorite artist. And even though I absolutely appreciate the mood of his art, the layouts of his art, I think one of his weaknesses is that his covers tend to be repetitious, especially around this time. A lot of his panels are just the hero in the middle with figures all around them. And if you look at the covers for this series, that's kind of what they are. So I do think he's a really good artist, but at this point he wasn't great yet. But they suit the story. So does someone else want to jump in and summarize chapter 2?
You know, I can do that if my cat decides to stop talking. Yeah,
sure.
There we are. So, again, a bit of a quicker synopsis for this issue.
Sure.
Batman turns around and sees he is being accosted by what appears to be a zombie. And more zombies and undead fiends rise from the ground around him within the cemetery. He ends up attacking one of them, and he hears a big grunt, and he realizes, well, that's an odd sound for an undead individual to make. That's just somebody in makeup. So he realizes this is a fabrication. These are not actual zombies attacking him. So he goes through warding off these fiends attacking him while the Riddler is looking on in a van. As he continues the fight, one of the individuals, of course, is revealed to be nothing more than a person who is dressed up as a zombie. The Riddler activates an explosive device on the individual and he dies. So the Riddler, again, showing that cold-bloodedness, far away from the Frank Gorshin Riddler. This is more cold, methodical, and very quick to kill. And then the remaining zombies are just animatronics, really advanced animatronics. My one critique is if, you know, you're the Riddler and you can have this sort of degree of robotic technology at your beck and call, why do you need to rob anything? But comic logic, let's go on. Anyway, Batman realizes the Riddler is in a van outside of the cemetery, and he goes to pursue through another round of attacks and investigation. Not only does he discover where the second of these babies that the Riddler has kidnapped is within the cemetery, he sees a clue left for him. And of course, I should mention this story is interspliced with sections going back to that framing story about the 18th century with this cult trying to perform a sacrificial ceremony. I do want to call attention to a great sequence on what is my page 41 in the trade edition of this, in which we see a barn that the ceremony took place in and its progression over time as the city is built around it until we get modern Gotham. Such a great shot. I love when artists do that. And this goes to Batman reflecting upon the clues of what could possibly be happening, including even the possibility that a clue that he heard from the Riddler could allude to the place where his parents were murdered and the potential that the Riddler might know his identity. So I love that passing thought and concern about what could be happening. So during this back and forth, we see Batman reflecting on the possibilities of what could this whole scenario mean, why the Riddler's character has changed, and we do see Batman pursuing, again, some leads in investigation. He goes to a bar And in the bar, a big fracas occurs where the Riddler's goons back up a van through the window, and a series of bloodthirsty dogs are released to attack the patrons inside and Batman. Luckily, an cop is there after hours, and he has a gun, so he's shooting these dogs. Very graphic. I was surprised to see this in a mainstream comic, to be perfectly frank. Very brutal dispatching of these dogs. But also, one of the Riddler's goons hands Batman a knife, and he is able to dispatch one of the dogs using said knife, and then continues his pursuit of the Riddler in his van that he used to put the dogs inside of the bar. Anyway, chase ensues. Batman eventually finds the Riddler and the third infant that was kidnapped. This infant is choking on a ball. The Riddler has actually given the child a ping pong ball, and it's choking on it. And so it's up to Batman to save this child while the Riddler walks away, which is, again, very nefarious, very, very much unlike the Riddler's usual MO of leaving clues and kind of having happy-go-lucky adventures with Batman in a game of one-upmanship. This is sadistic and vicious. So Batman, in the end, is forced to actually perform a tracheotomy on the child to dislodge the ping pong ball from its throat. And that is where the story ends, with Batman brandishing the knife, about to cut open the baby's throat to save it.
I'll just say, this story, the one thing about the story is that cliffhanger has stuck with me for how long? 40 years? 35 years? This shocked me as a kid. And it still shocks me now. It's still not something you see every day. And I don't know if this goes back to what Paul said about British and Irish writers just trying to shock the reader, but he certainly did a good job with me, so I thought it was great. A great chapter 2, developing the story and the mystery of what's going on with the Riddler. So I thought it was a great chapter. Adam, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I think this one really developed that tension of the mystery. Now, I do agree, by the time we get the resolution of what exactly is happening in the third chapter, things can feel a bit convoluted, but there is this sense of escalation happening throughout the story, which I really appreciate. And again, I have to go back to Dwyer's art. Even the fighting sequence within the cemetery between the zombies and Batman is just so kinetic. It's so well done. I love the asymmetrical, unconventional paneling. It really gives that sense of the forces bludgeoning down upon Batman. And then other sequences, such as the city developing around the barn where the cult was practicing their ritual, that flashback dream sequence when Bruce Wayne is sleeping and he ends up thinking about that night in Crime Alley. I've seen that situation recapped countless times to the point where it's ad nauseum, and yet I found this depiction to be oddly stirring. It was actually quite engaging to see the way it was illustrated. Overall, again, I think right now this story is doing a good job at balancing interesting story beats, a narrative where you are interested to know what exactly is going on, why the Riddler is so vicious and so ruthless at this point, and also this humanized side of Batman where his motivation is he needs to save these people, he needs to save these children, and the fact that there is this remorse that he's going to have to perform a tracheotomy on a child is just outstanding. And you do, even between the art and the dialogue, get this sense of pathos and this sense of desperation in him. It's absolutely incredible. And again, this is my Batman. This is what I like to see the character depicted as. Not someone who's going out just seeking revenge, but who's seeking what's right to protect the innocent. I'm going to be a broken record for the third issue as well, but that's my favorite depiction of this character, and I think that's why I find this chapter so satisfying.
All right. Nice, man. What do you think?
It had me thinking, what's the difference between this Riddler and the Joker? And I thought, you know what? I think the only difference is that the Joker is insane, and therefore you never know what could happen from one moment to the next. And even when there's a kind of method to what the Joker does, it's just completely driven by insanity. But this, like with the Riddler, everything is 100% calculated. But in an effort to make the Riddler more fearsome as a foe beyond just a puzzle of, riddles. I think here Peter Milligan has really kind of made the other half of the Joker coin. The Joker is the insane half of the coin, and the Riddler is the calculating half of the coin. Apart from that, I don't really see a whole lot of difference between them. And as for the art, this is a perfect example, this issue, of why it left me confused. There's a panel here or there where it looks like Neil Adams inspired. Then there's a panel here or there, it looks like Marshall Rogers did it. And then there's some other panels that are obviously Kieran Dwyer. Then there are some other panels which are just so absolutely run-of-the-mill, ordinary, you feel like anybody could have drawn it. So I don't know who Kieran Dwyer is from this. I don't know. Is he Kieran Dwyer? Is he Kieran Dwyer inspired by Neil Adams? Is he Kieran Dwyer inspired by Marshall Rogers? Is he just an ordinary, very ordinary artist, run of the mill, doing stuff that anybody with some talent could do?
Well, I think I'm going to add to that, because I was looking through this thinking, would Kieran Dwyer be a good monthly artist for Batman, like a regular artist? And for example, here on this page, you can see on page 7 of part 2, this shot of Batman at the bottom, I'm just picking that as a random example. It's an okay shot, but it's not great. Whereas someone like, I'll just use Jim Lee as an example. Jim Lee will probably make every panel look like a poster, but his storytelling is not as good and his figures are not as fluid. And so I think part of the reason why some of the panels don't look great, because even Jack Kirby, you can read an issue of Fantastic Four by Jack Kirby, and some of the panels are just telling the story, and he doesn't care about the actual the beauty of that one individual panel. And I just think it's because with this type of artist, he's probably just more concerned with the overall story. But I'm not trying to make excuses for him, but I know what you mean. Like, for example, this shot of Bruce Wayne at the bottom of page 14, I think that's a great Kieran Dwyer face right there. That's an example of what I think of when I think of him. But then you'll flip through, and this shot of the Riddler standing here, anyone could have drawn that. That's nothing. So I know what you're saying. I don't know. I guess that's my guess, is that he's just more concerned with the overall story.
Well, I want to add something here where I make this argument for people sometimes when I talk about music and particular albums I like, where sometimes some of the parts don't make for what you would call a 10 out of 10 A+ record, but sometimes the quality is, the overall is greater than the total of the sum, or the sum of the whole, I should say. For me, there are functional panels here, but to me, those actually indicate and exaggerate those more specific, more idiosyncratic panels. I think they do serve a function. And for me, I'll say something that is very controversial. I don't really care for Jim Lee's art. So,
I'm kind of with you. Yeah, I know.
I know.
Look at Paul. No.
I'll say this. It's because, like Mignola's art, I think making a double page spread or a poster, really great for a single image. But for me, one of the most important things a comic artist could do is make sequential art, make art bleed into each other, give a story to be told. To me, that's part of the genius of comic art. And I think Dwyer executes that excellently here. I would rather have someone who can, by connecting the panels, tell an amazing narrative than have someone who blows me away with every single panel. Is the ideal thing to have both? Potentially, but then sometimes I think if you're stuck on every panel, you might be a bit distracted, or the flow may not quite be there for the sequentialness of the story. I think this is why I'm so impressed by Dwyer's art in this one. And I do see the homages that Nice Man has brought up. I see the influences. They're undeniable, but I can't say it draws me away from the story. The page Mike has up right now, proceeding to Batman's decision to perform the tracheotomy, to me, that's a great comic artist.
I'm going to give you two examples. Allegedly, John Romita Sr. once said that the problem with modern day comic art is that kids will they they'll remember an individual panel or a splash page or a cover, but classic comic book art, they remember the story. It's almost like cinematography in a film. It shouldn't call attention to itself. Now, don't get me wrong, I love good art, but ultimately the art has to serve the story. And so, for example, this final page with Batman holding the knife, you might not put that up as a poster on your wall, but I remembered that cliffhanger of him about to perform the tracheotomy because of the story, and Keiron Dwyer happens to depict that in a very dramatic way, I think, with the knife being held up with the glint of light on it. So I don't know. I think I'm going to agree with you. Oh, and the other thing I'm going to say is Tom Brevoort, right? He once posted like a before and after type thing of the Kree Skrull War, and he gave two examples. And he said, and basically the point of the post was before and after Neil Adams. And the first page was Don Heck, and the second page was Neil Adams. And the point of his post was to show how much better Neil Adams was than Don Heck, because it was almost the same scene repeated. And I actually posted, I said, I'm sorry, but in this case, I like Don Heck's art better. Any comment on that, Nice Man?
Well, I think it's an impossible situation in general, because yes, the art has to tell the story. And again, as what would Jim Shooter say, we're in the business of telling stories. So first and foremost, tell a story. However, when you look at the art, it has to be visually appealing. It's not enough just to tell a story. And I think this is the trap that Jim Shooter fell into, where it's tell the story at all costs. And if I tell you to do 6 panels in a page and this happens in panel 1, blah, blah, blah. But you can't do that. You just can't, So I hate to, sometimes when I make comments, I think I sound like I'm name dropping, but I just say it just to try to help make a point. I was able to spend some time with Walt Simonson at the comic convention in England, because my girlfriend at the time had written to him. And he started correspondence with her because it was about some intellectual aspect of comic books. And then when he came over to England for the convention, he spent time with us, invited us to hang out with him at his table or whatever. And he was shocked when I told him how long it takes me to read a comic book, a good one. Because I said, no, if it's really good, I pore over every panel. I absorb every panel, every page. And he thought that I would just say, it takes me 10 minutes and I'm done. And I said, no, if it's really good, maybe I'll spend, 40 minutes on it, not 10. Yeah, but I remember him being shocked, and I was shocked that he was shocked. Because I thought, but you're Walt Simonson, you do beautiful work such as like Manhunter, the Manhunter series. Who would not want to spend time bathing in every panel of Manhunter? So it's an impossible situation, because there's a story to be told. It's true. Tell the story, yes. But I don't want to see ugly. Sorry. I want to be visually treated. So, but the point Adam made about Jim Lee, and also the point you made, Michael, about Jim Lee, and you think that Keiron Dwyer is a better storyteller. He may be a better storyteller, but I need some sauce with my pasta.
Sure. Okay.
So Jim Lee, the Hush stories in Batman, just absolutely beautiful, absolutely wonderful. The Jim Lee, even though people hate All-Star Batman, about the way Frank Miller characterizes Batman, although for me, that's probably how Batman would be in the real world. But look at the Jim Lee art in All-Star Batman. You don't like Frank Miller's interpretation of Batman. You don't like the writing on it. Okay, but you can love the art. And so here with Keiron Dwyer, I appreciate the storytelling. Occasionally there are panels which are really dazzling, really. As I said, there's a Neil Adams type panel here. There's a Jim Lee type panel there. There's a Marshall Rogers type panel there. Then, of course, there's good Keiron Dwyer stuff himself, by himself. But there are a number of plain panels that anybody could draw. And you could say, yes, but they're telling the story. That's nice. It's boring. It's visually boring. So, sorry. No.
Last question, Don Heck or Neil Adams, who do you like better? Okay, on to the next issue. We'll save that for another episode.
No, that's not fair. That's not fair to Don Heck.
Okay.
Don Heck was a very fine artist, non-superhero artist, especially in the 1950s. If you look at some of his sci-fi stuff and Western stuff, Don Heck is a very, very fine artist whose characters are full of character, and he's just not suited to superhero stuff. He really isn't. But if you notice with Don Heck stuff, I think nobody shifts the perspective more than Don Heck. From one panel to the next, this angle, another angle, another angle, there's constant shifting of perspective. And I think Don Heck does that more than anybody else. So give Don Heck a really good inker, like Tom Palmer in X-Men 64. Yeah, X-Men 64, I think, with Sunfire. Now you see, you can appreciate it, because now the art looks refined. And you appreciate all the shifting angles. The artists who are so influenced by Milton Caniff, they were slavishly devoted to Milton Caniff, like Lee Elias and Mike Esposito and Frank Springer. And that doesn't work with superhero stuff. You know, it's for character, it's for newspaper strip character stuff like Terry and the Pirates. So Don Heck was never suited to superhero stuff. It can only be all right if you give him a Wallywood inker or a Tom Palmer inker. Okay, but if it's a Vince Coletta or an Esposito, forget it. So in answer to the question, Neil Adams or Don Heck, that's an apples and oranges. I think honestly, I don't mean this in a mean way. I think that's unfair to Don Heck. He's not a superhero artist.
I'm just going to say one thing. John Buscema is one of my top four favorite superhero artists, but I actually liked Don Heck's issues of Avengers better because of Don Heck. Yeah.
The ones that he did in the 60s or the 70s?
Like the first, I'm talking about the first 40 issues before John Buscema became the artist. The early stuff when it was Hawkeye and Scarlet Witch, all that stuff. Yeah. But anyway, we'll get back to that another time. We got to talk about Dark Knight, Dark City here, folks. Let's wrap this sucker up. Part 3. Okay, and Nice Man, are you prepared to tell us what happened in this issue?
I would love to, but I never remember.
I'm just as bad as you with memory, but can you see my screen here?
I can. Well, of course, Batman is, and the description here is, of course, Milligan is playing with us because he tells us about how Batman's taking the knife and he's put the knife at the neck of the baby and he slices the baby's neck open. And you're like, Batman, you sliced the neck of a baby. But yes, because he's done a tracheotomy or something and gotten the ping pong ball out. And now he's running off to try and save the baby's life before the baby bleeds to death. And which he does, of course, he does. No baby is going to die in Batman. Thank goodness, I guess. And this next part, I think you can help me out here because I know that he's looking at a map trying to connect the dots kind of with the Riddler. And of course, it turns into like a question mark if you connect the dots.
Yes.
And this is, typical Batman, Batcave.
Right.
So, let me solve the Riddler's riddle. Where does it lead to? Oh, and now we get to back to the very beginning of the first issue, because now we know he's going to head to the scene of the original crime. So we know how that's going to go. But you see here on whichever page, do you know which page this is? Page 6. But again, I can never help taking slight diversions. What does this page remind you of?
The Killing Joke.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Joker page.
Mm.
It's a circus. It's a Joker page, not a Riddler page. But
Okay, I'll give you that. Yeah.
But we're here anyway, and then the riddles go on with a goat. There's a goat in Batman. Yes, a goat. But we've got fake mirrors like you have, and goons appearing to try to fry Batman alive, and so on. And then I'm not sure exactly what happened here, quite how that he got out of it, got to the real situation. He's out of the is he out of the Hall of Mirrors?
Yes. He says in narration that he hands the baby to a passing police car, and he heads for Stockman Square. Yep.
I just want to point out one thing before Nice Man continues the narration. But the implication in this page is that Batman had the goat with him in the Batmobile, and then led the goat out of the Batmobile and patiently had it wait outside the front door of the Riddler's warehouse while he climbed up on the roof. I just want to throw that out there.
Okay.
He was a well-behaved goat.
He truly was the goat.
Yeah,
he was the goat. So we've got the fancy expression. We've got no, I won't even use the fancy expression. We've got the conventional Batman goons. He's gonna beat them up. Of course he is. So he does. But the goat has made his appearance, like Adam said. And now this is interesting. We get the Riddler in a dress we've never seen him before. These are robes, like 18th century robes.
Right.
So now we're getting it all tied together. And then you see, Batman tied down on a slab with ropes. Didn't part of your head say to you, wait, Batman can't get out of these ropes? They're just ropes. He's tied by... Didn't it remind you of the TV show from the 60s?
Never mind the fact that if he's tied up, he can just take his mask. Riddler can take his mask off. Yeah, I know. That always bothers me. I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
But, we're here for the ritual. Maybe Batman just wants to kind of play along with it and find out the story. But to me, this scene reminded me of the Batman TV show from the 60s. Mm-hmm. He was always getting tied up to things and going to be sawn in half and stuff like this. But anyway, this gives us the opportunity to learn the full story of how brilliant the Riddler is, because he set up 6 situations to match the perils that the original sacrifice woman had to go through. And that's why now everything makes sense through flashback. And that's why he even saved Batman from being struck by his goon's vehicle, because he didn't need Batman to die. He just needed him to go through the 6 rituals that the original sacrificial person had to go through, the number being 6. And so, exposition, it tells us what the story's all about. It tells Batman. I'm sure he enjoyed listening to it as he lay on the slab. Why not? And now the Riddler wants to, do the deadly deed. But here's the unexpected twist, isn't it? That makes it something more. And this is where Peter Milligan takes this story and kicks it into another gear. I think you would agree. We'll find out in a minute, I guess. Kicks it into another gear, because both Batman and the Riddler hear this kind of ghostly voice. And where is this voice coming from? It is the spirit of Gotham.
Mm-hmm.
correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be completely delusional. The spirit of Gotham is communicating in this case. And again, correct me if I'm wrong. Doesn't the spirit of Gotham say that it kind of gave birth to Batman? Is that right?
It's implied, yes. And then the idea is that now Bruce is wondering if his whole life was orchestrated by the city, right?
Right.
His
So
fate, his fate.
before I completely abandon the plot, so the Riddler is overcome by this ghostly voice because he hadn't calculated that. He calculated everything else, but this is completely not calculated. And so that kind of does him in somewhat, and Batman's able to, okay, time to get out of these ropes. And it's the woman who's been a skeleton for a couple of hundred years is back in human form. But is this literal or figurative?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's supernatural, right? Like we see her as a flesh and blood person, and then Batman carries her out of the fire. And
Right.
in a very cool scene, when he opens up his cloak, she's a skeleton. I mean, I thought it was very effective.
Yes.
We'll talk about whether we agree with it or not, but I thought it was well done.
Oh, no, I think it's fine. It's a supernatural tale. You've got Gotham addressing you. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the woman taking form again and communicating with Batman and him rescuing her, getting her outside, and now she's back to being a skeleton because she can be, because her purpose is solved. Her soul is good, and he even being a kind, tender-hearted Batman, which Adam would love. He's even getting her buried next to his parents, no less. Next to his parents, you know? And again, one panel is particularly impressive, another one not quite so, and so on. The thing that I wanted to mention here was that where he kind of kicks it into something else. Do you remember the Straczynski Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And you remember what he did right early on, which I loved and got me actually reading Spider-Man again, which I would never have imagined, where he shows through very, very clever writing that it wasn't maybe just an accident that Peter Parker was bitten by this radioactive spider, but that it was orchestrated from the other side for him to be bitten. So in effect, he was chosen to be Spider-Man. Right? And in this story, Gotham is telling us that Gotham chose Bruce Wayne, kind of. You know, which makes Gotham a murderer because
Sure.
Bruce's parents have to be murdered for him to become Bruce Wayne. So anyway, Batman buries Dominique in the Wayne mausoleum and has done his good deed, and off he can go into the night.
I have to comment on Spider-Man first. Okay, let me just comment on the trope. We'll comment on the trope. I think that the early issues of Straczynski's run were fairly good. I enjoyed that Ezekiel storyline. I really hate the idea of Peter Parker being fated to be Spider-Man. I really hate that. It was such a simple, random story, and the whole idea is Peter Parker's supposed to be a regular person. But that being said, I can accept it more for Batman because his mission seems like a holy mission, right? And so it fits in more with Batman. But I think that the fact that I don't think this has ever been referred to again, it's obviously apocryphal, right? Like that's not why Bruce Wayne became Batman. But for the sake of this story, I think it's fine because like Adam said, it's ambiguous. Is this really the voice of Gotham, right?
Well, I will say you one thing to this, because the narrative itself, it says that this could also be a demon, because these people who were performing this ritual in the 18th century, they were trying to make the sacrifice to gain power from a demon. The demon may be Gotham personified, or it might actually be a demon saying it's Gotham that's haunting Gotham.
Sure.
That's left ambiguous. And there's one line that Batman says, and I'm just interjecting here because I did appreciate this before I give my other thoughts on this comic. He said, maybe I was made by Gotham, by the city, but maybe in the same way that water takes the form of whatever mold it's put into. And I thought that was interesting. Not to say he was fated, that his destiny was bespoke for him, but that due to circumstance of being in such city, a person like Batman would just naturally come about to be. That's the one sort of ambiguous thing about this outcome I appreciate, where it doesn't definitively say Bruce Wayne was fated to go on this crusade for justice. It's more just implying, because of this state of this world and the city, a person like Batman was inevitable. And I find that to actually be quite interesting.
Yeah. And okay, so now going back to what I had mentioned earlier about Peter Milligan kind of having this mystery and then explaining it all in the last issue, which he also did in Animal Man and which he's also done in other stories, we kind of find out that all of these wacky things that have been happening were all because the Riddler had to follow a specific ritual. Now, here's the thing, and this is kind of also why I love supernatural stories, but I've never quite bought into the whole idea of a ritual, because rituals are so, what's the word I'm looking for, like vague. And the fact that the Riddler is admitting, he's like, well, like, what does he say here? The fourth stage was to slay a wild dog with a silver dagger. They don't come much wilder than a pit bull terriers, do they? Well, who's the judge of that? The demon? You know, and it's almost like every ritual he does, he's bending the rules a little bit. And it just seems like, who's the authority that's sitting here going, okay, that one's good enough, that one's good enough, right? It just makes it seem kind of absurd.
Yes.
And so, if the voice in the clouds had told him, no, actually, I would have preferred a Chihuahua, you know?
Right. Ridiculous. So yeah, but I mean, obviously, I do like the fact that everything's explained, but I did find it unsatisfying in a way with how it was explained and the explanation for everything.
But it was ambitious.
Definitely ambitious, yeah.
Yeah. And overall, sorry, Adam, but overall, isn't it fair to say that Milligan and Dwyer, they did a good job overall?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's worth your money, I think.
Well, I'll say this. Other than Jim Starlin's Batman, so far, this is the only stuff from this era that's held up for me so far that I've reread. But Adam, what were you going to say?
So I have a few points I want to make. So my apologies for how droll this might end up being. I felt the third issue actually compromised a lot of my enjoyability over the story for a number of different reasons. One of them is the outcome of the Riddler, that the Riddler was obsessed with this ritual because it's implied this demon or this force, this personification of Gotham was motivating him, almost possessing him to do this. And that makes it a lot less interesting. Rather than having some other reason why the Riddler suddenly is more bloodthirsty, more methodical, he's simply possessed by this force. And that denudes any interest of character progression. It would be more fascinating for me to see something had happened to the Riddler, or some inevitable outcome had occurred where he realized he can no longer just be the prankster putting his little puzzles around for Batman to solve, that things got more bloody, more serious. And I felt that was a letdown. It was a cop-out, because the next storyline you have the Riddler in, you don't have to reference this at all. He was temporarily possessed, and he's done. There's some mischaracterization as well, which I thought was really incongruous with the rest of the run from these three issues, because I talked so much about how I liked Batman's characterization in this. But there's a line very early on where he's having an exchange with Alfred, and they're talking about the clues in front of the Bat computer, and Alfred is saying, oh, it's a line by Thomas Pynchon in a novel, Crying of Lot 49. But I'm always more of an Anthony Burgess man myself. No, you're not. Alfred would never read Anthony Burgess. He would read, I don't know, he'd read Mansfield Park or something. He would not do that. It seems very much in conflict with what we know of his character established and going forward. And I do hate those sort of title drops when people reference that sort of literature when it comes to a character that it seems incongruous with them knowing about. Also, I would not believe that Batman, being as hyper-read and vigilant and encyclopedic in his knowledge, would not know a reference to a Thomas Pynchon novel. That seems very out of place.
However, I'm going to counter that by saying the fact that Batman is fighting crime 12 hours a day and training 12 hours a day and sleeping, I do like the idea that he can't possibly have time to also read every novel, right?
What I think is better, I saw a storyline and I can't quite put my finger on it, but Batman, there was a clue and it was a rock and roll lyric because Batman would listen to pop music because he doesn't have time for that. And to me, it's like, oh yeah, because it's so devalued, this popular culture thing, that Batman wouldn't even consume this.
Right.
That's a little bit more interesting, but I do get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Also, Alfred saves Batman in the end. He opens up the door to the basement and relieves him. So I kind of laughed that Alfred solved the mystery early on, and then he went and saved Batman. Like, he's the real hero of the story. Like, Batman didn't even need to show up to this warehouse. He just needed to send Alfred this whole time. But the one thing I do want to focus on, joking aside, I don't like the unambiguous nature of there being a supernatural threat. I didn't like the characterization of the Riddler's reveal in the end because I thought it would be much more interesting if he was so invested in this journal he came across that talked about this ritual. Maybe it would just be a deepening of his psychosis where he was trying to solve the mystery, the riddle of would this ceremony actually produce power? Would he actually be able to raise a demon? And for me, if it was left with that, without clarity of whether or not a supernatural thing were occurring, that would be more fascinating and maybe give better motivation and a more interesting motivation for the Riddler rather than this, which does feel as a bit of a cop-out. And there is a confirmation that the supernatural is fully happening, not only with everyone hearing this voice, but also because one mention we didn't give was that this is technically a time travel narrative as well, because Batman's figure, the giant man-bat that we mentioned in earlier issues, he hulks over the 18th century ritual about to take place to kill Dominique. That's Batman. That's him being projected into the past, scaring away all the cult members.
I don't think I even realized that. Okay.
Yeah. So again, not to say that this ruins everything or that it ruins the things I really liked about the previous two issues. It just, a lot of contrivances that didn't feel satisfying, and something Nice Man might appreciate. I think this is the weakest art of all the issues we've seen. This is the one issue of these three where I would look at some pages and not only would I agree, some of the panels feel unexceptional, but sometimes the flow doesn't really feel that consistent or cohesive.
I'll say,
Mike, you're on a page where I think this is a great example. Suddenly Alfred is there, but why?
Yeah.
It's there. There's no action. There's no dynamic. I don't think any of the panels, aside from the detail on Batman's cape in the first panel, are particularly striking. I think this is just an example of the one time it felt like, I'm not sure if the story was rushed, if there was supposed to be another subsequent issue, maybe in the original draft, and they had to expedite this. I don't think that's the case, but it felt a bit rushed at this point.
I agree with every one of your points, but I think the way you can make the girl work is that I think it does kind of work because the fact that only Batman sees her alive, I think that's what makes supernatural stories work. Because a friend of mine once said that of all reported ghost stories, no two people ever claim to see a ghost at the same time. I don't know if that's true or not. But it does add that level of ambiguity because it could just be in their mind, right? So with Batman talking to the girl and carrying the girl, this could just all be in his mind. And it's not until he opens up his cape that he realizes that she's a skeleton. It's not that she's transformed. It's that she always was a skeleton. He just didn't realize it because he's under this hallucination.
One caveat to that, and I don't disagree with that. I think that's a valid point. But both him and the Riddler do hear the voice at the same time. So,
yes, that I wish that was not there. You're right. If it would have just been take that out and it's all just Riddler's obsession that drives the
Yes.
story, you're right. That would make it better.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I said about it being ambitious. Maybe it's over ambitious.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
still, like we said, holds up. And yeah, it was an anomaly at the time because it was not the regular Batman writer, not the regular Batman artist, but Peter Milligan did end up becoming the regular writer for Detective for a little while at least. And we're going to be reviewing all those issues, so I'm looking forward to that. But I would like to go back and see what the Riddler was like the next time he made an appearance, to see if any of this was referenced or if his character was different, right? It'd be interesting.
When was the next time? Do we know?
Well, there's probably, if we go into DCFandom.com, we can find out, but I'm sharing my screen right now, so I don't want to do that.
I want to bring up one other thing because
Sure.
Iceman actually brought this up, and I think this might point towards why this is. A lot of people, including myself, didn't much care for Jim Carrey's depiction of the Riddler in Batman Forever for a number of different reasons. The reason I didn't like it was because he was just playing the Joker. And
Yeah.
I wonder how much something like this, where, as Nice Man said, there's a lot of Jokerisms informing the Riddler's character in this arc, how much maybe someone going to a more contemporary arc of a Batman story looked at this and went, oh, well, this is Riddler. This is who this character is going to end up being in our film adaptation, and this is what we'll put in the script. And I think there might be something to that. In fact, I notice when particular characters are adapted for more mainstream affairs for Batman comics, there is a Jokerification because apparently he's the only adversary that people really care about, despite the diversity and range of his incredible rogues gallery. So I do think, again, I'm repeating myself, I like the idea that we're seeing this colder, this killer Riddler. I just was dissatisfied as the reason why it was revealed he had this arc, this character change. And if we saw something a little bit more unstable, a cerebral, methodical killer, rather than Joker's anarchic clown of chaos, I thought that would be enough to differentiate the two and make it more interesting. But I don't know what the next arc for the Riddler is, but from what I remember reading within the 1990s, he never really met this characterization again until post Batman Forever, where again people wrote him like Jim Carrey's character.
Right. All right, Nice Man, any final comments?
Well, there have been a million Batman stories since when was the first one? 1940? 41?
39.
Oh, it's 39. So very, very hard to keep coming up with new things, fresh things. And I give Peter Milligan credit for trying. And Keiron Dwyer, as we said, some very good art, some so-so art, some inspired art, but overall I give them credit for trying,
Definitely something that, like I said, holds up, and I'm looking forward to reading more. And in my reread of Batman last year, I read one issue by Peter Milligan, and I thought, no, I got to save this for OK Corral. So I did not continue reading. So there you go. Okay, that wraps up our review of Batman Dark Knight, Dark City. This is available in trade, but it's also available in, I believe it's Batman, the Caped Crusader, the Caped Crusader, Volume 3, I believe, but you can find it. It's available in a couple different formats. Now, for next episode, we are going to review, I'm going to put this to a vote. Would you rather read another arc of Judge Dredd or Sam Slade Robot Hunter, also by John Wagner?
Robo Hunter.
Oh, Robo Hunter. There you go. Okay, so which one? Adam, what's your vote?
We haven't touched Robo Hunter yet. Let's go for that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Nice, man.
Robo Hunter is my favorite series from 2000 AD.
That's all I needed to hear. And maybe you can send a message to Ismail and see if he's available.
Yeah, if he's not whale hunting.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so that's it. That's UK Corral. Until the next time, see you later.